And we are live. You already know who it is. My name is Mike Kyle, aka the Fantasy Vulture. I have over a decade worth of fantasy football experience, and I've continuously competed for fantasy championships over the course of the past 7 seasons. Let's make it 8 in 2021. But enough of me. I'm here for you. On today's episode of the FV Show, we're going to be talking about my top 6 breakout candidates for the 2021 fantasy football season. We're going to cover the entire fantasy football spectrum. So 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end to make sure that all of our bases are covered and no position gets left behind. Before we dive into the video though, a few quick things from you. First off, hit that like button down below to show your support for the channel. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video from me. And last but not least, follow me on all social media platforms at FF Vulture. Now, when I was making this list, I was actually finding it really difficult to identify some of these breakout candidates. And as a result, they're kind of all over the spectrum in terms of current ADP, which I'm fine with. But just to kind of give you like that parameter, like there are some guys who are going much earlier than others on this list, but I still think that they have a very high chance of outperforming what their current ADP is and really elevate their game in the fantasy football landscape. But really just going through the current ADP charts, I feel like we're just in a position this year, maybe more than any, where we know to a vast degree what guys are going to be. So I had to do some digging here. I think I got a solid 6 though, and again, they're placed all over the draft board. So this is actually the team that you realistically could put together in a single draft. So I'm really excited about that. Maybe you try this strategy in a mock draft or something like that. But let's just dive right in. These are not in order, so we're just gonna run through the list. Let's start off with the quarterback position actually, because I got that one pulled up right now. And my quarterback breakout / sleeper, I'm just gonna call them breakouts. I feel like with sleepers, it's again going back to that whole idea of this year, the idea of a sleeper this year is just very different than what it's been in years past, and it's a trend that's ever growing just because that everybody's doing sleepers, and so as a result, everybody knows who has a very high chance of breaking out and elevating their game. But let's just go to the quarterback position here. Enough rambling. My breakout is none other than Ryan Tannehill, who broke out last year. If you guys have been on the channel for the past year, you know that this is a Ryan Tannehill stan account, because every single year he outperforms his ADP, and Ryan Tannehill's a good quarterback, and he finds himself again in this Tennessee Titans offense that revolves around Derrick Henry, but Tannehill has the skill set to elevate this team to a whole nother level, as we saw last year. Tannehill's also a guy that is never going to hurt you. Last year, he played all 16 games, and I think his worst finish was quarterback 21. Every single one of his games, he finished as a quarterback 2 or a quarterback 1. It was actually split 8 games as a QB1 and 8 games as a QB2. If you don't know what that means, basically he finished as a top 12 quarterback 8 times, and he finished as a top 24 quarterback 8 times as well. But you look at what this team has done. Like, Derrick Henry's still there. This offense is still going to keep rolling. They lose Jonnu Smith, but they bring in Julio Jones. That seems like a pretty net win to me, if you ask me. Anthony Furcher is a suitable tight end replacement. I don't really expect the drop-off to be too massive there. And the only real big question mark is what happens now that Arthur Smith has moved on to the Atlanta Falcons from offensive coordinator to be the head coach over there in Atlanta. But you look at what Tannehill did last year. The only, outside of Arthur Smith leaving, it's maybe just like passing volume. Like, he only threw the ball 481 times last year, and he actually had less than 4,000 passing yards, but he had 44 total touchdowns, and that absolutely can happen again, right? We've been waiting for the shoe to drop on this Tennessee Titans offense, just about because of how efficient they've been, especially in the red zone. But this team just keeps fucking rolling. Like, there is no sign of that stopping whatsoever, and I'm really excited to watch this progression just continue to roll and snowball. Because where you're getting Ryan Tannehill at right now, at QB 12, at 901, guys, he was quarterback 7 last year. He was quarterback 7. He averaged 21.9 points per game. He never hurt you. He only helped you, and he gave you a consistent floor week in and week out. And now you add another year of A.J. Brown. You bring in Julio Jones, who is a superior upgrade to either Jonnu Smith or Corey Davis, whoever you want to fucking compare that to. It's Julio fucking Jones, for Christ's sake. And there's no real reason for Ryan Tannehill's ADP to be this low again. We do this with him every single year. And every year he outperforms his ADP. I'm all in on Ryan Tannehill. He's probably the quarterback that I've been targeting late in drafts. And we've been exploring ways to just find ways to stack A.J. Brown, Ryan Tannehill, Julio Jones, Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, which again is my favorite stack of all time. Whole video about that coming in the near future, so be on the lookout for that. Subscribe down below so you don't miss that. Let's move on to our next breakout. And I'm going to talk about Jeudy, second-year wide receiver for the Denver Broncos. And Jeudy had a very weird case going on for him last year. Let's start off with the obvious. The quarterback play in Denver was extremely subpar. Jeudy actually led the league in uncatchable targets with 26. Additionally, he also was second in the league in drops with 9. So what classifies as a drop? That's always a hard thing to kind of articulate, but you can kind of assume that maybe at least 2 or 3 of those drops came from the fact that he would have had to make a spectacular catch to come down with the ball. So we can say what? About 30 uncatchable targets? Well, guess what? Jeudy had 113 targets on the year and only 52 receptions. If we just say he catches 25 of those balls, because Jeudy, by all accounts, is not somebody who has like issues with drops or anything like that, right? Coming out of college, he was a technician, a pure wide receiver, great with his hands. And so we just bump that up by, let's just say, 25 receptions. You're now looking at around 80 receptions. He only had 850 yards this year, got in the end zone just 3 times, and as a result, he just wasn't able to produce any level of consistency for your fantasy team last season. He had 2 games as a wide receiver 2, 1 game as a wide receiver 1, and 2 games as a wide receiver 3. He played all 16 games. Literally 11, is that 11? Let's do math there. 11 of his games, he was outside of the top 36. That has to change, and it's going to change. However, my big selling point for Jeudy, outside of the fact that his numbers are due to just naturally improve comparatively to how they were last year, also the fact that he's entering year 2, the quarterback situation here matters, in my opinion. I can't get on board with the whole Drew Lock train right now. I tried. I just don't see it in him. But Teddy Bridgewater, I can. And if Bridgewater is the starter there, yes, Carolina struggled to score touchdowns last year, but Teddy Bridgewater had 4 players with over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. We saw the consistency from Robbie Anderson. We saw what Curtis Samuel was able to do. We saw what DJ Moore was able to put together as well. Having those 3 guys, we have proof that if Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback, good things can happen for a wide receiver core. Yes, the floor may be lower because of the lack of touchdowns, but there is the ceiling is going to be lower, actually, because of the lack of touchdown, but there is going to be a safe floor. And where you're getting Jeudy at right now, I'm totally cool with it. Let me just vet his ADP. He is going behind Courtland Sutton, who actually plays a big role in this as well. So let's see, Courtland Sutton is going at 709, Jeudy is going at 805. And the reason why this matters is because last year, Jeudy, the rookie wide receiver from Alabama, he had to step in once Courtland Sutton went down. I mean, they were supposed to be a 1-2 punch that is supposed to kind of run the league here for the next handful of years. But because Sutton went down with that torn ACL, all of a sudden the offense just lost a critical piece, right? Courtland Sutton, I'm the veteran, like he's still really young, but he was like the veteran wide receiver on this team. He was actually supposed to take a big step forward, and it was supposed to be him and Jeudy running in tandem with one another, and then all the pressure just got shifted towards Jeudy, again, playing his first season in the NFL. What happened to Jeudy last year doesn't surprise me. But now you get to actually buy the ADP dip. Again, going in the 5th round, you look at Jeudy or Deebo Samuel, Jeudy or Antonio Brown, Jeudy or Tyler Boyd, Will Fuller. I want Jeudy out of everybody on that list based off of current ADP. The next name I want to bring up, let's stick with the wide receivers here for a sec. And this, I would argue, is my favorite breakout candidate for the 2021 season. It's Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Russell Gage. The fact that his ADP seemingly has not moved whatsoever since Julio Jones has been traded blows my mind. Frankly, blows my mind. So what do we know about the Atlanta Falcons offense? Well, number one, that team is built around the offense. We can start there, right? The Atlanta Falcons defense has struggled for years, and it's been hey, Matt Ryan, we're going to go as far as you take us. So what are we going to do? We're going to throw the ball 650 times every single season. We also know historically with Matt Ryan, he has an incredible track record of supporting 2 top 24 wide receivers. You look at Roddy White and Julio Jones, and then transitioning from Roddy White into Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. Well, guess what? That wide receiver 2 role is now open. We know that Calvin Ridley is a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, and there's now a role here for somebody to step in and be that number 2 wide receiver. Yes, they drafted Kyle Pitts in the first round, but I really don't expect Pitts to command the targets in year 1 that a typical Matt Ryan wide receiver 2 would. I think that, and again, even with the passing volume, it's possible, like I'm not going to rule it out, but there's definitely room for everybody to eat here in Atlanta, right? So here's what you need to know about Russell Gage here. There were 6 games last year where he finished with 13 plus fantasy points. In 4 of his last 5, that happened. Russell Gage was on fire the back half of the year. And that's interesting because we always go back and look to remember who played well down the stretch, because more often than not, that's actually a bigger indicator of following success, of following season success than kind of anything else, right? It's chemistry with the quarterback, it's getting an understanding of the offense, whatever the case is, there's a ton of different variables. But the more success you have later on in the year, that usually tends to translate the following season. And his ADP right now, again, this is a number 2 wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, who historically, under Matt Ryan, have had pretty much every wide receiver, as far as top 2 wide receivers, finish inside the top 24. Russell Gage's current ADP is 1206, wide receiver 54. You legitimately could draft Russell Gage in the 12th round and start him as your wide receiver 2 to start the year, and I'd be totally okay with it. I'd be totally okay with it. Because with Russell Gage, let me pull these up right now. I was looking at the numbers yesterday and I did not write them down. The targets he was getting were substantial. It's not like he was just getting 3 or 4 targets a game and making big plays out of them. The targets he was getting were consistent, and he had several games with 8+ targets. So we go back through and we look here. He had 12 targets, 9 targets, 12, 8, 10, 11. And he was able to find his way into the end zone 4 times as well. Right? And that number's going to grow up because he's not playing with Julio fucking Jones anymore, right? So I'm so confident in Russell Gage that if you're punting wide receiver, which has been the thing that I've been banging the drum on all offseason long, like that's the epitome of this, is because you're getting a guy who has an incredible high ceiling, proved to be a viable fantasy option for you last year, and steps into this brand new role as the number 2 wide receiver. In fact, there was a dynasty trade that went down in my league, and Julio was traded, and the person who traded Julio, it was actually the person who acquired Julio also got Russell Gage in the same deal. That's what happened. And when I saw that go through, my jaw hit the floor because I was actively trying to target Russell Gage. And not only did this guy get Julio, who's leaving Atlanta, he also gets Julio's replacement, if you will. So what a finesse move that was by that dynasty owner. All right, let's shift gears here to the running backs. And this is where I was talking about where I said some of these guys are earlier in your draft. And if there is one player who I've been screaming from the mountaintops to all of you to draft, it is none other than Kansas City running back Clyde EdwardsHelaire. The math just makes too much sense on this one. And it's one of those things where you look at ADP and you kind of think like, yeah, that's about where he should go. But the ceiling that he has is so much higher compared to everybody else around him. Because of the offense that he plays in for the Kansas City Chiefs, with the best offense in football, Andy Reid's history with fantasy running backs being traditionally in like that top 10 range, and the fact that this is just a dude who is also a pass catcher, right? He's a pass catching running back, a very good one, going in the middle of the second round at running back 13. But let's talk about last year. I've talked about this before, but I really want to reiterate, just in case you haven't seen my content recently, that this kid, we had high expectations for him last year. I get it. But what he ended up doing for your fantasy team last year was so much better than everybody else made it out to be, and the only reason why we perceived it as being bad is because of the fact that he just didn't live up to the top 5 expectation that we set on him so early in his rookie season in the NFL. Admittedly, kind of looking at hindsight, that feels maybe a bit ridiculous. The math and the logic that we had was right, but I think we just missed a few pieces in the nuance of it all. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 181 carries, 36 receptions for 800 rushing yards and almost 300 receiving yards. Only got in the end zone 4 times, had 4 games as a running back 1, 4 games as a running back 2, and 3 games as a running back 3. So, if nothing else, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was consistently inside the top 36, but unfortunately, that's not what we drafted him to be. We drafted him to be more so in that top 12, which he did show flashes of. But the big thing with Clyde here is the fact that he got stuffed inside the 5. I think the number is 6 times, if I'm remembering it correctly. Right? How many times did we see last year where they would give the ball to Clyde at the goal line, and for whatever reason, he just didn't score? He just didn't score. That was the very frustrating part about Clyde, because they were kind of gimme opportunities. If you remember 2 years ago, Nick Chubb actually had the exact same thing happen to him, and this past season, Nick Chubb got in the end zone 10 times, right? So positive regression is going to take place here. But additionally, with Clyde, there were just a lot of messed up things in that backfield last year. They bring in Le'Veon Bell. There were games where they gave Clyde 20-plus carries, which is a great thing for Clyde. And so they were never really able to get Clyde into a rhythm because the game felt like it was always changing. Not to mention the fact that Clyde actually missed 3 games last year due to injury. So I'm looking to buy the bounce back for Clyde. I really think that it's there. The pieces are still there. The talent's still there. And the only thing that's different this year is the fact that some people feel like that they were burned. They were burned by Clyde, even though in 9 of his 13 games last season, he put up double-digit fantasy points for you, which is fine. In fact, the majority of his games, I believe, were over 13 fantasy points. So looking at that, the actual numbers are different in a better way than what we actually remember, right? The numbers actually tell the story, and that gives me the confidence to draft Clyde as my running back 1 if I go, let's just say I go wide receiver or tight end in the back of the first, and then on the turn, I take Clyde there. I think he's being super undervalued even at that 205 ADP. This is a dude who absolutely can finish inside the top 7, and it would not shock me if that were the case this season. Our next breakout, this is an interesting one, and I'm putting, this is the video, this is the piece of content where I tell you where I stand exactly on this Jacksonville Jaguars backfield. My breakout is Travis Etienne. Why? Because I'm following the breadcrumbs. Last year, we all know what happened with James Robinson and the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that was James Robinson came in as an undrafted free agent and scorched the fantasy industry. Just came in like a wrecking ball, shout out to Miley, and ran through everybody's league. So we go in this offseason, Jacksonville has 2 first-round picks. Obviously, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence, but what would they do with that late first-round pick? And then they announce Travis Etienne, running back from Clemson, to reunite the duo that has electrified college football for the past 3 years. And all of a sudden, we all started looking around at each other thinking, what the fuck just happened? And that's the point. That's the point. This team spent a first-round pick, which includes that 5th-year option, on Travis Etienne, who is an incredible, dynamic running back. First in ACC history in touchdowns, and I believe he's like 2nd in rushing yards, something like that, something crazy. But the talent that he has, the comparison that I've been giving to Etienne is Alvin Kamara. I think their games mirror each other extremely well. And when you look at the draft investment, you look at what they've been doing with Travis Etienne as far as even just in OTAs, they were lining him up at wide receiver. And that's really interesting to me. And that's because no matter what happens with Travis Etienne, I think we can confidently say that worst case scenario is Etienne can be a consistent flex play, right? What's the difference between Travis Etienne, Nyheim Hines, and Kareem Hunt, for example? They're, if anything, right, worst case scenario, all things in a vacuum, they are backup running backs who get on the field consistently for third downs, take over some drives, and are going to be involved in the passing game. And as we know, a reception is worth more than a carry. So looking at that in the worst case scenario for Travis, like, I love his current ADP. His current ADP is 504 at running back 16. But even still with that, again, that's the worst case scenario. Guys, I don't know the world where you spend a first round pick on a running back and you don't fucking use him. And you don't, I guess, maximize him, we should say. I'm not sure how long James Robinson is for the Jags. I'm not sure if they trade him. I'm not sure if they just kind of transition him into the goal line. But here's what I know. By the end of the year, if this backfield is not the majority in favor of Travis Etienne, something went terribly wrong. Because it just doesn't make sense why you pair Trevor Lawrence with his college teammate. You spend a first round pick on a running back, which we all know how some of us feel about that, right? To just not use him. I feel like this whole offseason with Urban Meyer coming out, just saying like these different, I don't even know what you call them, just different blurbs about how they're going to use this backfield. To me, it feels a whole lot like smoke. It reeks of smoke. And if you know anything about Urban Meyer is the most... Urban Meyer is very calculated. I'll leave it at that. He's very calculated, he's very strategic, and he also knows what he's fucking doing. So because of that, Travis Etienne going actually behind James Robinson right now, like James Robinson being drafted at 405 an entire round earlier than Travis Etienne is fucking hysterical to me. Because there's no way that it actually plays out like that when it's all said and done. And now, let's move over to our final player that we're going to talk about. We're actually going to shift back to the NFC South, and I want to talk about New Orleans Saints tight end Adam Troutman. And it's happening. There's no way that the breakout for Troutman doesn't happen this year. Let's take a look at what has happened to the Saints this offseason. Number one, Jared Cook is out of there. Jared Cook last season, if I'm not mistaken, let me pull this up. Jared Cook had 60 targets in New Orleans. All right, not a great number, but it's still there. He was also able to get in the end zone 6 times as well. Adam Troutman had 16 targets, caught 15 of them, pretty good. Adam Troutman, rookie tight end out of Dayton, just for context if you have no idea who this kid is. He also had 171 receiving yards and got in the end zone once. Not a terribly big sample size, but there's enough there to look at. Michael Thomas is now injured and out until probably October. And when you look at who else is in this wide receiver room between Traquan Smith, who I believe is also struggling from an injury right now, and Marquez Callaway, are we really going to take one of those guys over Adam Troutman right now? I'm not sure, but I know one thing. When a team lacks in wide receiver, they normally make up for at the tight end position. This offense is so fucking depleted. It's going to take a masterclass, I think, for Sean Payton to turn this thing around and make it look presentable. However, Sean Payton is the perfect coach that I want for this job. Like, we're going to find out just how good Sean Payton actually is as a head coach this year, I feel like. So when you look at Troutman, especially with where he's going in ADP right now, where you're getting him for free in your drafts. His current ADP is tight end 16 at 1306. I mean, you can wait and wait and wait. If you don't take one of those early tight ends, which is the thing that I've been banging on a lot this offseason, the two guys that I'm looking at, ironically enough, and that I'm looking at late, are Adam Troutman and Jared Cook. It's just those two guys. I know what I'm going to get from them. At least I know what I'm going to get from Jared Cook, especially in that offense in LA with the Chargers. But it's very similar to Travis Etienne. The breadcrumbs here leave a trail for what's going to happen with Adam Troutman, and I'm really excited for that. This, to me, is very simply 1 + 1 = 2. Let's not overthink this. You have 0 wide receivers in New Orleans right now, and we're just using 0 in terms of, like, yes, they exist, but like, you're not overly excited to start Marquez Callaway or Traquan Smith week in, week out, are you? Right? So they have no wide receivers. 60 targets just opened up, minimum, for Adam Troutman, and you get another year in this offense for him, right? This is 1 + 1 = 2. I'm not going to overthink this. If I'm looking for late round tight ends to draft, Troutman's my number 1. It's so obvious, and I'm totally cool with just punting the position because I expect Adam Troutman to finish inside the top 10. In fact, let me look. Where do I have Troutman at? I'm very curious about this now. Yes, I have Troutman. I have Adam Troutman right now at tight end 9, and looking at it a bit further, that number should probably be tight end 8. And again, you're getting him at tight end. What number did I say? 13? Yep. No, tight end 16 at 1306. So incredible value for you there if you decide to take the Troutman, because he is a man amongst boys, and I'm really excited to watch him break out in year 2. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button down below. Subscribe so you never miss a video from me. Let me know in the comments section who your favorite breakout is for the 2021 fantasy football season. And thank you so much for watching. Remember, people come and go, but fantasy championships are forever, and I will see you in the next video. Later.